The sun was setting over the quiet fishing village of Delta, casting a warm orange glow over the thatched roofs and the bustling riverbank. Paul, a hard-working fisherman, was preparing for another long night of fishing. He had spent his entire life in Delta, learning the ways of the river from his father and grandfather before him. As he pushed his wooden canoe into the water, he noticed a young woman standing on the riverbank, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She was dressed in a traditional wrapper, her hair tied back in a neat knot. There was something about her that caught Paul's attention, a quiet confidence, a sense of mystery. Paul couldn't help but stare as he expertly navigated his canoe through the calm waters. The woman didn't seem to notice him, lost in thought as she gazed out at the river. He wondered what she was thinking, what had brought her to this place. As the night wore on, Paul found himself glancing back at the woman, wondering if she was still there. And each time he saw her standing in the same spot, her eyes fixed on the horizon. It was as if she was waiting for something or someone. Finally, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Paul decided to take a chance. He paddled his canoe back to the riverbank, tying it securely to a tree branch. As he walked towards the woman, he felt a sense of nervous excitement. What would she say to him? Would she even notice him? But as he approached, the woman turned to him, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Good evening," she said, her voice low and husky. "My name is Mary." Paul's heart skipped a beat as he smiled back at her. "I'm Paul," he replied, feeling a sense of shyness wash over him. "It's nice to meet you, Mary." As they stood there, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore, Paul felt a sense of connection to this mysterious woman. He didn't know what it was, but he knew he wanted to spend more time with her. "Would you like to walk with me?" Mary asked, breaking the silence. "I love walking by the river at night." Paul nodded eagerly, feeling a sense of excitement and possibility. As they walked together, the stars shining above them, he knew that this chance encounter might just change his life forever. As the days turned into weeks, Paul and Mary's walks along the riverbank became a regular occurrence. They would talk for hours, sharing stories and laughter, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. Paul had never felt this way about anyone before, and he couldn't help but wonder if Mary felt the same way. But as much as Paul loved spending time with Mary, he couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something from him. She would often disappear at dusk, only to return at dawn, her eyes sparkling with a secret that she refused to share. Paul's curiosity got the better of him, and he found himself wondering what Mary did during those hours when she was gone. Was she meeting someone else? Was she involved in something mysterious? One night, Paul decided to follow her. He waited until she had disappeared into the darkness, and then he set off after her, his heart pounding in his chest. The moon was full overhead, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As he followed Mary, Paul noticed that she seemed to be heading towards the river. He quickened his pace, his senses on high alert. What was she doing? As he emerged from the trees, Paul saw Mary standing at the water's edge. She was facing away from him, her eyes fixed on the river. And then, in a movement that seemed almost fluid, she stepped into the water. Paul's eyes widened in shock as he watched Mary's legs shimmer and fuse into a long golden tail. She was a Mami Wata, a spirit of the river. Paul's mind reeled as he stumbled backward, his foot snapping a branch. Mary turned, her eyes flashing with fear as she saw Paul standing there. For a moment they just stared at each other, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. Paul felt as though he had been punched in the gut. He didn't know what to say or do. Part of him wanted to run away, to forget what he had just seen. But another part of him, a part that he couldn't ignore, wanted to stay, to learn more about this mysterious woman who had captured his heart. Mary took a step closer to him, her eyes pleading. "Paul, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to forget what you just saw. You have to promise me that you'll never tell anyone." Paul hesitated, unsure of what to do. But as he looked into Mary's eyes, he saw something there that gave him pause. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw a deep sadness, a sense of loss. And in that moment, Paul knew that he couldn't turn his back on her. He couldn't promise to forget what he had seen, not when he knew that it would hurt her so deeply. "I won't tell anyone," he said finally, his voice firm. "But I need to know more. I need to understand what's going on." Mary's eyes searched his face, and for a moment, Paul thought he saw a glimmer of hope there. But then her expression closed off and she turned away from him, disappearing into the darkness. Paul was left standing alone on the riverbank, his mind reeling with questions. What had just happened? What secrets was Mary hiding? And what did it all mean for their future together? Days passed and Paul didn't see Mary again. He began to wonder if he had imagined the whole thing, the tale, the river, the secrets. But he knew he hadn't. He could still feel the shock, the awe, and the fear that had coursed through his veins that night. One evening as he was walking along the riverbank, he saw Mary standing by the water's edge. She was facing away from him, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Paul's heart skipped a beat as he approached her. "Mary," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned and their eyes met. For a moment they just stared at each other, the tension between them palpable. "I'm sorry," Mary said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Paul took a step closer to her. "You didn't hurt me," he said. "You just surprised me." Mary smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I suppose I did." They stood there for a moment, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. Then without saying a word, Mary reached out and took Paul's hand. Paul felt a jolt of electricity run through his body as their hands touched. It was as though the entire world had come alive and anything was possible. As they walked along the riverbank hand in hand, Paul knew that he had made a decision. He was going to be with Mary no matter what. He didn't care that she was a Mami Wata, or that their love was forbidden. All he cared about was the way he felt when he was with her. Over the next few weeks, Paul and Mary's love continued to grow. They would meet in secret, stealing moments whenever they could. They would walk along the riverbank holding hands and talk about their dreams and aspirations. But their love was not without its challenges. The villagers began to suspect that something was going on between Paul and Mary. They would see them together and they would whisper to each other, their eyes filled with suspicion and distrust. Paul's friends and family warned him to stay away from Mary. "She's not one of us," they would say. "She's a spirit, a creature of the river." But Paul didn't listen. He knew that Mary was more than just a spirit or a creature. She was a person with thoughts and feelings and desires. And he loved her for who she was, not for what she was. As the days turned into weeks, Paul and Mary's love continued to flourish. They knew that their love was forbidden, but they didn't care. They were willing to risk everything to be together. But little did they know, their love was about to be tested in ways they never could have imagined. As the weeks turned into months, Paul and Mary's love continued to grow stronger. They would meet in secret, stealing moments whenever they could. But despite their love for each other, they both knew that their relationship was not without its challenges. One day, as they were walking along the riverbank, Mary turned to Paul with a look of concern on her face. "Paul, I have to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it?" Paul asked, feeling a sense of trepidation. "The river is calling me," Mary said, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "It's telling me that it's time for me to return to my true home." Paul's heart sank as he heard Mary's words. He knew that he couldn't lose her, not now, not ever. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm a Mami Wata," Mary said, her voice filled with a sense of resignation. "I'm a spirit of the river. And the river is calling me back." Paul felt as though he had been punched in the gut. He couldn't lose Mary, not now, not ever. "But what about us?" he asked, his voice shaking with emotion. Mary's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Paul. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what the future holds for us." Paul took Mary's hand, feeling a sense of desperation wash over him. "We'll figure it out," he said, trying to sound confident. "We'll find a way to be together." But as they stood there holding hands and looking out at the river, Paul couldn't shake off the feeling that their love was doomed. The river was calling Mary back and he didn't know if he could compete with its power. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the river, Paul knew that he had to make a decision. He could either let Mary go or he could fight to keep her. And as he looked into her eyes, he knew that he would do whatever it took to keep her by his side. But little did he know the river had other plans. As the days passed, Paul and Mary's love continued to flourish, but the river's call grew stronger. Mary began to spend more and more time in the water, and Paul could see the change in her. She was becoming more and more distant, as though she was being pulled away from him by an unseen force. One night as they stood on the riverbank, Mary turned to Paul with tears in her eyes. "I have to go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The river is calling me and I must answer." Paul felt as though his heart was breaking. He couldn't lose Mary, not now, not ever. "Please don't go," he begged, taking her hand in his. "I'll do anything to keep you here." Mary smiled, a sad smile. "You can't keep me here, Paul," she said. "I'm a Mami Wata and the river is my home." As she spoke, the water around them began to churn and foam. The river was rising and Paul knew that he was losing Mary. He held her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "I'll never forget you," Mary whispered, her lips against his ear. "I'll always love you." And with that she was gone, pulled away from him by the river's powerful current. Paul was left standing alone on the riverbank, his heart shattered into a million pieces. He stood there for a long time, staring out at the water, hoping against hope that Mary would return to him. But she didn't. The river had taken her back and Paul was left with nothing but his memories of their time together. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, Paul became a shadow of his former self. He stopped fishing, stopped socializing, stopped living. He was consumed by grief and he didn't know how to escape. The villagers tried to reach out to him, but he pushed them away. He didn't want their sympathy, their pity. He just wanted Mary back. But she was gone, lost to the river forever. And Paul was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered heart. The river, once a symbol of their love and happiness, had become a reminder of his loss. Paul couldn't bear to look at it, couldn't bear to think about it. And so he left Delta, leaving behind the memories of his time with Mary. He started a new life in a new village, but he never forgot about the Mami Wata who had captured his heart. Years later, when Paul was an old man, he would sit by the river and remember Mary. He would remember the way she smiled, the way she laughed, the way she loved him. And he would weep for the love they had shared and for the love they had lost.